So the budget for NGOs, and of course I have to summarize a little bit. It's not 100% correct what I'm saying now because there are different budget lines, but the support for civil society organizations will be reduced from 1.4 billion euros to 400 million. So it's a 1 billion euro budget cut.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest, who's a very good friend of mine. You know, I met in Bangladesh many, many years ago, but he will introduce himself. Jan, please go ahead.
Hello, Maurice, and all the kind followers who listen to this conversation. My name is Jan Waltmans. I've been working with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands for 34 years, and over the past years I've been ambassador of the Netherlands in Iraq, Lebanon, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And at this moment I'm strategic advisor to our Director General for International Cooperation, who was confronted with major budget cuts decided by our new government. And I will assist her to make sure that we organize things in such a way that maximum results can still be achieved with our inputs in the field of development cooperation.
And since when do you have this new job, Jan?
Since 1st of September this year.
Oh, okay. So it's relatively new. We will go there because I would like to know more from you and hear what your view is and what's happening in this field. But I would like to bring us back first to, you know, the day that you were born. Where was that? And tell us a bit about your upbringing.
Yes, I was born in the city of Heerlen in the very southern part of the Netherlands. My parents met there at early childhood and liked each other so much that for many, many years they stayed together till my father passed away. My father became a politician in the 70s, and that's why we moved from that southern part of the Netherlands closer to The Hague. I grew up in a very pleasant atmosphere with a lot of friends around me, no brothers and sisters. And after finishing secondary school, I attended university in Tilburg in the Netherlands, studied law, and I think partly influenced by the interesting job my father had. I had in mind already at the age of 16 that whatever I would study, whatever I would achieve, I wanted to work abroad, and that in the end happened.
Okay. And why law? Is that because of your dad, or was there some other reason why you?
No, it was difficult for me to. I didn't really have a passion as far as selecting a certain study was concerned. I was not that strong in mathematics, so as it happened with other people, law seemed to be an appropriate study for me, and that turned out to be like that.
Okay. And then, you know, what happened after your study? I mean, you wanted to go abroad. I mean, it's one of the reasons. How did that happen? How did you get then ultimately, you know, work? How did you find that work overseas?
Yes, I did my military service in a kind of junior policy officer position. So that was the first experience working for the government, organizing training for conscripts. At the headquarters of our army in The Hague. And then, of course, I started to look for jobs. And it was not that easy at the end of the 80s. Quite a contradiction to the current times where young people can, in general, quite easily find a job in the Netherlands. So I applied for the selection within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and was happily surprised that each time I managed to go to the next round. So eventually I was selected. I worked in The Hague for our asylum department. And then afterwards, for which I was sent 6 months to Tehran. Quite interesting. I traveled all over Iran in those years. And then our first posting, I met my wife. She was happy to join. Had the same background in law as I had, and we started to work abroad in Ghana. Enjoyed it very, very much. We enjoyed the adventure, the kind people, the sense of humor the Ghanaians have, the work. And since then, I've never applied for a position in a Western country. We both liked the adventure, so Sudan, Zambia followed, Bangladesh, as where we met, Maurice, you and I. And then afterwards to Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Bosnia-Herzegovina.
And you mentioned in the beginning, Jan, that you have been an ambassador in a couple of countries. But I clearly remember when you and I met in Bangladesh, you were the first secretary, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct, yes.
And I asked you a question at that time. I don't know if you remember that, if you wanted to become an ambassador. And you were very adamant at that time, saying, that is not for me. And so what happened? What changed your mind?
I don't think that I did not have it in mind, but I think I was modest deliberately, because let's say if you work for a multinational company, for Shell or an airline or another kind of company, you never know whether you will reach that kind of position and whether it suits you. But throughout my career, I got also signals from other people that, let's say, management and being in the position of ambassador would be something I would qualify for. So in the end, it happened, and it was a most wonderful experience.
Okay, yeah. Tell us a bit about your first post as an ambassador for the Netherlands. Which country was that?
That was in Iraq in 2015. ISIS was knocking on the doors of Baghdad. So it was a very, very complicated situation. Step by step, the international military coalition supported the Iraqi army in such a way that ISIS could be defeated to a certain extent. And the Netherlands played a role in providing support together with other countries. So that was politically a very important file for the Netherlands, for our government. So as an embassy, we received a lot of visitors, and we were really on top of developments and working very, very hard. Professionally, extremely interesting, but I've also seen terrible things. The same images we see now from Ukraine, for example, cities that were completely destroyed. ISIS putting all kinds of explosives in toys for children, in between the doors when people would return home after they had left and opened the door, it would explode. It was a very, very, very sad situation. But together with the other international partners, we try to mitigate the impact for the people. But still, too many people passed away in that situation, and too many houses were destroyed. So it was a very sad situation. I returned to Iraq a few months ago for work, and one positive development is that, at least as far as attacks are concerned, it has become more stable, less dangerous for the population. But still, the country struggles with so many other issues.
I have a question about your family, because you have lived as an ambassador in quite a number of countries that were dangerous, right? So in Iraq, did you go there alone?
Yes.
Okay, not with your whole family.
In Afghanistan and Iraq, I was without a family. And that was, I think, applicable to almost all colleagues from other countries, whatever their position at their embassies was. And, most of the day you're living in a compound that is heavily protected. And that's the case for almost every country. So it's almost impossible for partners and certainly for children to live there in a pleasant way. So that's the situation, yes. And then there are certain conditions that where, when you're posted, for example, where you and I used to live in Bangladesh, and the employer provides 1 or 2 tickets a year to return home. But in Iraq or Afghanistan, expatriate staff members, in most cases, can go home a bit more regularly.
Okay. And so before I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about, those countries where you've worked from a more, how did you see what you were able to do or not, etc. And a little bit more about the family. So how was that then? Did you have to work without your family around? How did you cope? Was it tough? Not?
Of course, it's tough in certain ways. My wife was a strong lady. She unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but she supported me in taking this decision to apply for these positions in Afghanistan and Iraq. As I said, every 4 to 6 weeks there was a short break to go home, and nowadays there are ways in which one can communicate in between. That's a lot easier than when we used to live in Bangladesh, for example, 25 years ago. So, of course, it is not easy. At the same time, professionally, it's extremely interesting. And once being in Kabul or in Baghdad, work absorbs so much of your energy and time. It's really from early morning till 8 o'clock in the evening that there's hardly any time to think about missing the family. But in general, it has been quite okay. And now and then, of course, there is a small issue with one of the children in their puberty, which makes it a bit more complicated. But all in all, it went well.
Besides Iraq, you also were based in Lebanon, Bosnia, Afghanistan. So, yeah, can you pick maybe 1 or 2 countries and tell us more about the situation, and especially in the light of what is happening in the world today? And you know that I work for an NGO. What we see is in the field of development cooperation, more and more governments are making less funds available for the work of NGOs. So it becomes tougher. On the one hand, maybe it's good, people say, because there is localization going on, so more local organizations are supported. So can you tell a bit about your experience in working under difficult circumstances, and then also keeping in mind that it seems that our sector is changing as well, and how you see that?
Yes. Let me start with your first point, your first question. Throughout my career, more and more I started asking myself the question, we try to plan for certain projects, and we make sure that an organization with which we work, whether it's an NGO or a UN organization, provides a project plan that is business-like, everything is checked, so that once our government provides a certain amount of money, that one would expect the results to be visible after 1 or 2 years. And often those results were not as positive as we had anticipated. And more I started to realize that was not so much the mistake of ourselves or of this counterpart organization, but it was the way things were organized in the country concerned. What I want to stress is that in those complicated countries where I have worked, I have learned that often the ruling class was not 100% committed to serve the people and to provide better education, drinking water, better health facilities. A lot of things happened behind the facade, as it happens in any country, that we could not really see. And it's a matter of the way things were managed. Corruption plays a role. So it was extremely difficult to achieve the results that on paper and in the discussions were very well prepared in advance. That's a lesson I learned, and one would expect all of us working in this international field to understand this and to see it. But I have the impression that many of us working in the field of development or diplomacy are very much focusing on the issues that are at stake at this very moment. We all want to work towards achieving results in the future. So often in many cases, we do not spend enough energy and time in learning from the past. And by not doing so, I think the results of what we try to achieve are less positive than if we would be in the position to better learn from what has been tried before. The incentive in many of our organizations is to really focus on what your director or a minister needs tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, but not so much to see whether we in a certain country have already invested in reconciliation, in improving the health systems 10 or 20 years ago, and to see what did we manage to achieve in those years and what was so difficult to achieve. So that's my reaction to the first part of your question.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second part, development cooperation. Yes, working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in The Hague, and our development cooperation department is integrated in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We see as well that development cooperation is under pressure. Over the past 15, 20 years, whenever in an opinion poll, the Dutch public would receive the question, if budget reductions by the government are required, where do you think that the government should put the cuts? Development cooperation has always been number one. So apparently the public in the Netherlands is not convinced that the money the government invests in development cooperation is sufficiently well spent. At the same time, a huge number of people in the Netherlands do donate for charity, also for developing countries. So there's an awkward mismatch. Well, our current government decided to a 2.4 billion euro budget cut, so 2.6 billion US dollars in the coming years, with the idea that that would be structural after 4 years. So a huge reduction. I guess it's about 40% of the budget for development cooperation of the Netherlands government. And of course, that has a huge impact. It has an impact on the NGO sector. So the budget for NGOs, and of course I have to summarize a little bit. It's not 100% correct what I'm saying now, because there are different budget lines, but the support for civil society organizations will be reduced from 1.4 billion euros to 400 million. So it's a 1 billion euro budget cut. Well, that has never happened before over the past 30, 40 years. So that has a huge impact, and the government wants to promote and encourage these organizations to turn to the Dutch public even more than they already do, to ensure that up to 50% of their budgets will be provided by the public and not by the government.
And where do you think that comes from? So that's one question, Jan. And then the second question is, if you look at the total budget of any country in terms of development cooperation, it's a very small percentage, right? So then you can ask your question, why is that? Especially is, if you ask that people are still supporting those type of courses. So where do you think that comes from?
It's a mixed bag. First of all, in recent years, people have become more and more concerned about challenges we all face within our country in different fields, the consequences of climate change, of pollution because of our huge agricultural production in the small country we are, and the cost involved in solving that issue. There are many challenges. The arrival of many migrants to the Netherlands. It's like in the USA. It's in let's say in the election campaign, the number one topic I think. Housing issues. Young people cannot find affordable houses, and our population does increase by 200,000 people a year, while the fertility rate is below par. So it's migration that makes our population grow. So these kind of concerns that people have, concerns also about the future of their children, is one reason to be less oriented towards what happens outside our borders, while the Netherlands has always been such an internationally focused country. That's one part of the story. The second part is that people are not convinced, or not sufficiently convinced, that the work the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and embassies do in the field of development cooperation leads to the results needed. Then one can ask the question, why do people not have a positive impression? Difficult to answer. One could say we should have better communicated about the work we do. And secondly, the other side to the coin is that in general, media do not so much report about successes in general, whether it's about development cooperation or other subjects. It's easier to be, and apparently more attractive, to be very critical and to publish critical articles about different subjects, including development cooperation. Of course, there are situations where corruption plays a role. Well, those are more highlighted than the programs that lead to certain results. So it's a mixed bag, and it's complicated. And many people, of course, within the organization are concerned, are sad about this development. In that sense, I'm a little bit different. Let's say if we have not been able to convince our politicians and our population about the quality of the work that is being done, we have to look into the mirror and do better, explain better. And one of the things in which I'm involved now is to ensure that staff members of our ministry more often visit communities in the Netherlands and have an open discussion about our work, ask people questions before lecturing. And I do that a lot, and I've done so a lot in the countries where I've served. And whatever the background of people is, people in general do not really understand what an embassy does, how it functions, how it organizes its work, so that one has to explain what results have been achieved in different fields and what results not. So it's interesting and important to listen to citizens, but also to explain to them how we work and why we are active in certain countries.
No, and I always, my listeners know I always like, if listening to each other is lifted up, I hope that this podcast is contributing to that. So if I ask you, Jan, to look back at a number of countries where you've worked, and you're asked what are you most proud of, or come up with an example where there was a positive change as a result of something that you were part of. Which example would you mention?
There's one example that I use when people ask this question, and of course there are many more. While I also have to be modest, because after having worked in Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, things have not really improved a lot in those countries. And in whatever role one works in such a country, as a development worker, as an embassy representative, working for a company, of course, we are all contributing just a little bit, and we don't change another country. But the example I often mention, of which I'm very proud, is that when I was in Iraq, ISIS was still controlling the second biggest city, Mosul. And there were still more than 1 million people living there. ISIS had made very clear that anybody who would try to flee that city would be killed. And they had put snipers and explosives all over the city. What I'm proud of, and where we have achieved a certain result, jointly with the Iraqi army, the military coalition commanders, and the humanitarian players, is that at our embassy, meetings were organized to prepare for what we call the liberation of Mosul. So the military and the humanitarian side talked with each other to try and organize it in such a way that people could flee from the city in an as safe as possible manner, that when they would reach the borders of the city, they would be taken by Iraqi army transport and buses to camps that had been installed by the United Nations and NGOs. The prediction was that between 70,000 and 300,000 people would be killed in that liberation movement. In the end, 10,000 people, around 10,000 people died. Still too many, but it is an example where by organizing, let's say, meetings of different actors at our embassy, we managed to organize and prepare for this process in the best way possible, and that has saved many lives.
Thank you for sharing that, Jan. I'm trying to process this, and also in terms of people that are not familiar with the work that you and I have been involved in, and you are at different levels than I. I think when I talk about development cooperation, a lot of people think maybe two things that often come up. One is, this is a drop in the bucket. So what does it really do? What's really the impact? And the other thing is of skeptics is, with development cooperation, very often, if not always, countries, there are strings attached to that, because of countries would say, okay, you get this project from us, but the cars that you should use should be from our country, or you need to pave the way for this particular company from our organization. What is your reply to those two, maybe skeptical remarks, but coming from different angles?
Yeah, there's certainly some truth in it. And it depends from country to country and from government to government. The Netherlands, over the past 40, 50 years, has always promoted that development cooperation should be provided in an untied manner. So the support that the Netherlands provided would not be tied to Dutch companies, to the need to buy things in the Netherlands, consultancies or goods or equipment, etc. There are other countries, and also a bit depending on their governments, like the United States, where that link is different, where tied aid is the norm. And so it differs from country to country. I think that with the new government in the Netherlands, the discussion about to what extent we should provide untied aid might come up again. So that's a choice of a government, of a country. Having said so, then the next question is, to what extent does one achieve results? What I have been very happy about and proud about is that about 20 years ago, when I was posted to Zambia, 7 directors general for development cooperation, European directors general, the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, United Kingdom, Germany, the Netherlands, decided to try and harmonize all these procedures and the way we work in that country as a pilot to the extent possible. And we did achieve quite a lot. But then in the end, when you look back at those times, it shows how difficult it is to really harmonize procedures, decision making. And you may remember from our time in Bangladesh, I was then responsible at our level for the health sector. We would be sitting around the table in the conference room with 20 representatives of embassies, United Nations, and NGOs, and 1 or 2 representatives from the Ministry of Health in Bangladesh. And that is an awkward situation. So it is complicated, yeah.
A question that I always ask to my guests and is one of the things that we have kind of agreed upon as a world is the Sustainable Development Goals. So, we need to make our world more sustainable, more just. It's not perfect, but I do think it is a result of discussions at different levels. Different parties were there. Most countries signed up for it. So the question that I have about these 17 Sustainable Development Goals is, what do you like the listeners to know about the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, it's a list indeed of 17 goals. And before having this talk with you, I had another look at those 17. It's a list of issues I already mentioned: health, education, safe drinking water, reducing poverty worldwide, peace, justice, strong public service. Key issues, key goals to everybody. If those 17 goals improve, in general, life improves for everybody on the planet. And of course, there are people who are extremely poor. There are people who are extremely rich. But still, if there is progress being made on the SDGs, the world becomes a better place. Certainly also for the next generations. So I think having those development goals is very important. And it's important also to educate young people. And I had a look, as I said this morning, at those goals. And do I contribute in the best way possible to all those 17 goals? No. Should I? Maybe yes. But what I did see is that there are certain goals to which I feel very much attached. And that's what I would also like to encourage your listeners to have a look at those goals and see whether there are certain goals where you think, hey, yes, this is a development goal that I consider very important, that is close to my heart, and maybe I can do a little bit better there. So that's the way I look at it.
Great, thanks. And now these goals are set that we should reach them before 2030. But on average, we have reached 15 to 17% of these goals. And a growing group of people around the world is saying, one of the reasons that we are not reaching those goals, or that we're going too slow, and also, the recent crisis in the world have led to that some of the progress that you have made, we have gone backwards. Anyway, that growing group of people is saying one of the reasons that we're not reaching those is because we did not, or we are not paying proper attention to the skills, knowledge, and abilities that you need as an individual and as a community to really work on those goals. And because those goals have to do with process and system changes that you need. So as a result of those discussions, they came up with the inner development goals. And those are 5 goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And in order to reach those 5 inner development goals, 23 skills were identified on things like critical thinking, empathy, trust, respect. So my question to my listeners is, have you heard about those inner development goals? And even if not, any thoughts?
Yes. In all honesty, before you invited me for this interview, I was not really aware of those inner development goals. Very interesting. I had a look at it. And I think if you take those inner development goals and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, if you put it all together, and if you as a person would be able to commit to all those goals and to live your life in such a way that you support those goals to the maximum, yeah, you would almost be a saint. Huh? It's quite an agenda, and I think it's a wonderful compass. It's very interesting, and I really once again would like to ask our listeners to have a look at the inner development goals and sustainable development goals, because it makes you think, it makes you humble as well, and one does realize that that improvements also as a person are still possible. Certainly, of course, amongst the inner development goals, there are certain goals that one may find in religion, or in the upbringing of children, to be honest, to take care of other people's feelings and to support other people. There are many goals that are applicable to you and me, Maurice, even if you have not read them, but it's quite an agenda. So to be able to say, yes, this is part of who I am. Wow, I don't think many people can meet all those goals at the same time.
Maybe piggybacking on this, Jan, is this podcast is a spin-off of a 100-mile walk that I started to do in 2012, and I walk to raise awareness around hunger, poverty, and injustice. And then during COVID, I was not able to do the walk with others. I had to walk alone. So then I thought, how can I still walk with others? And then I came up with this virtual walk, and that has gone out of hand now a little bit. This podcast still going on. But during those walks, if I'm accompanied even for a couple of miles, I talk with the co-walkers about what is the purpose of life? Why am I walking? Why are we on this earth? And then we get involved in these discussions about spirituality, and for some people it might be religious. What I'm most fascinated with is the discussion around what is happening with the younger generation. How do they see life and purpose? So my question for you is what do you see happening among the younger generation in your community in terms of purpose of life, and mental health is something that comes up on a regular basis around the world, that especially younger folks are struggling, right? So yeah, any thoughts? Any observations actually?
Well, one thing I should say from the beginning is that most of the young people that I meet in the course of the week, let's say, are young people who are relatively well off. Young people, my own children, the young people with whom I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the children of my friends and family members. So I do realize that most of them have been able to study at different levels, have been able to find a job. And really, to a lesser extent, do I meet young people that have not been able to finalize school and find a good job. So that's one thing to be aware of, and that may be applicable to many people with our backgrounds. What I do see, and I guess that's not only applicable to the Netherlands, is that because there is such a huge choice of things one can do, it's social media, it's television, sports activities, leisure in other ways, weekend trips, etc., 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 that there is so much stress amongst young people. And they want to join each and every event with their friends. When your wife and my wife got pregnant, it was a very happy news and an interesting 9 months, etc. And then when the baby was born, it was given a name and it was celebrated. But now, with the generation that has children now in the Netherlands, there is a gender revealing party in which they invest a lot of time and energy. There is the baby shower party before the child is delivered, in which all the friends and family members are involved. Quizzes are being distributed in which you have to indicate the gender of the child and predict the name and the date of birth, etc. And this is just one example. So I see that they are under a lot of stress. And if you want to see your children, you really have to take the agenda and find a moment when they have time. So that's quite a difference. And I think also because of social media exposure, where of course things are maybe not always presented the way they are, a bit more beautiful. They want to, without knowing, they are also competing, I think, with each other. So that's quite worrisome. At the same time, I meet so many young people who have a lot of energy, have beautiful ideas, initiatives, and I think that's where hope comes from. If you allow me, in Iraq, Lebanon, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, I decided to interact with young people to the extent possible. So wherever I went in those countries, I insisted that there would be a meeting with young people from all walks of life. So the refugees from Syria in Lebanon, the young people in the second city of Lebanon, Tripoli, that had no way to find a job, were not educated, were fighting within their communities with young people from other religions and ethnic background. Young entrepreneurs, startup companies, etc., and activists. And I was so deeply impressed in these countries that while many people left the country, they wanted to stay and to improve the situation. And that inspired me and also my colleagues. And whenever we had a high-level visitor from the Netherlands, and in those countries we had quite some visitors, ministers, the prime minister, etc., I insisted that they would talk 1 hour at least with young people. And we made a selection of a few young people, and it's my impression that they really, really appreciated those discussions, because these young people were very open, very direct, had ambitions and ideas. And in addition to all the official meetings, that really helped the visitors to better understand the situation.
And what do you think they are doing? They are doing or thinking differently than. I mean, I heard you clearly mention about certain things that have changed, and the example that you gave around, when the whole process around pregnancy. But maybe going back to your example of that you try to mobilize and listen to the younger generation. How do they look at life, and in comparison with, when we grew up? Is there a difference? Is there more pressure? And then especially maybe in relation to, the issues that we work on around, the sustainable development goals and etc.
Yeah. It's not an easy question to answer, because it's so difficult to generalize, to talk about the young people. And as I said, let's say those who are well educated, have a job, they all still have the opportunity to think about and to be concerned about things that are happening, to select food that is better, let's say, for sustainability, for the planet. Of course, healthy food is often more expensive than unhealthy food. So those young people that can afford to devote part of their time to think about these issues, who can afford to buy clothing or food or travel in ways that are more sustainable, and they do think about it. Not all, but I see that a lot. Animal welfare, etc. they might be quite different from those who have to struggle to have a meal every evening, even in Western countries, to find somehow a job or a part-time job somewhere. So it's difficult to generalize, but what we do see also in the media, at least part of the young generation is really concerned about what is happening in the world, climate change, insecurity that is getting closer to Europe now as well because of the situation in Ukraine. And at the same time, we also see a lot of young people who have so much energy and try to contribute to a better future. It's a mixed situation, I guess.
Okay. And one quick question, Jan, is that you heard that I'm actually still doing that 100-mile walk, it's getting more and more tough by the years, injuries and stuff. But if you would be asked to walk 100 miles in 5 to 7 days, for which cause would you do it, and why?
Yeah, I would do it for the organization March, headed by Leah Baroudi in the city of Tripoli in Lebanon. I just mentioned that community. In Tripoli, they're in the poorest areas of that second city of Lebanon. There are different ethnic religious groups living there. And the conflict in Syria was somehow brought across the border. So young men from the Alawite and the Sunni communities killed each other from the balconies across the street. And this young lady, Leah, started a cultural cafe in the middle of that area, in the center of that area, and managed to calm down the situation. She developed a play with these young men, and that was a big success, and they traveled all over Lebanon to show that reconciliation is possible, that it's possible to live together if you have a different background. In the end, she also, partly with a small support from our embassy and the British embassy, she developed contacts with the regular army in Lebanon. I introduced them to the director of Unilever. And by doing so, men and women from that community managed to find jobs. They started to clean up their own neighborhood, to paint the front sides of shops, etc. And almost everybody in Lebanon knows about the story of this young lady and her underprivileged young men and women and what they have achieved. So that has been really an inspiring experience. And the funds that they received were so limited. So they really did most of it themselves. And in a situation where leaders in a country like Lebanon do not reconcile, do not promote people to live together and to meet each other across the borders of their communities, for all kinds of reasons, it's beautiful to see that there are these initiatives. And I managed to involve the best-known sportsmen of Lebanon in organizing meetings with these young people and youngsters from the south, where the bombing is happening now, the Shia community, Christian community. And what these young people said when they arrived in the village in southern Lebanon, they said about the others, they are terrorists. So I allowed them to speak, and they said, yeah, my whole life, my parents and everybody tells me that those guys from the north are terrorists, and the other way around. Well, at the end of the day, after they had, we also did not 100-mile walk, but we did a hike in the mountains. They had discussions with, of course, with trainers to discuss all kinds of issues. And at the end of the day, they were all exchanging the contact details, because all of a sudden they discovered that the other groups were no terrorists, but were young people who had exactly the same challenges and dreams as they had. So it's a wonderful organization.
Right. And we all make sure that we mention that also in the podcast notes so that people can check that out. And maybe also piggybacking on what I hope this podcast will contribute to is connecting people, that you start listening to each other. And I've tried to capture that through one question that I'm asking to all my guests, and that is, can you please come up with a question for the next guest? So the previous guest has a question for you.
My question is, what is the one space where you are your best authentic self? And space could be literally a place, physical place, or it could be a community, a being, somewhere you are. Where is it that you're authentic?
It's not so much a certain place. And I think having lived in many different countries, of course, most of the time in the Netherlands, it's not so much a certain place, but it's the people that surround me. So you could sense, I think, that I talk with passion about these young people in Lebanon. People who really want to move away from conflict and from, let's say, from emphasizing how others are different from them. People who take risks to improve the situation, as did, of course, a number of people that I've met in Afghanistan, in Iraq, who really risk their life to help other people. Let's say in an environment with these young people having open discussions, that's where I'm certainly, when you look at it from the professional perspective, where I'm extremely happy. That's where I want to be. And that's why it's also quite easy for me to organize sessions with all kinds of people in the Netherlands to talk about the importance of international connections, international cooperation, and not in the sense that I'm promoting that we should allocate as much money as possible to development cooperation, for example, but isolating ourselves between the Dutch dikes and hoping that things in the world will improve autonomously. I don't think that is the way the Netherlands should go.
Your question for the next guest.
I would like the next guest to share with us who inspired him or her a lot and why, and in what way that has influenced the person concerned.
Music is very important to me. Jan, I don't know if you remember that. I was part of a band also in Bangladesh. So I always have a question about music as well. If you had to choose a song or a piece of music that best represent for a big part of who you are, who Jan is, which song or piece of music would that be and why?
I might have answered the question differently 20 years ago. And I think most of us, when you get older, you have a lot of experience. One may be more in a position where one tries to understand other people's positions and not immediately judge. I chose Let It Be. It's, of course, not a very original choice, but it is linked to this, not immediately judging on others. Try to respect others who may not live the lifestyle that you and I have. And it's also, for me, linked to strength. As I said, I lost my wife, and she died in a big explosion in the port of Beirut 4 years ago. That was certainly in the Netherlands all over the media. And I, however sad I am, and I have been, and my children, but I decided for myself, I want to continue. I don't want to be day and night a very sad person in the next 20, 30 years, not thinking and talking about anything else than this. So Let It Be, in a certain way, of course, because you will never forget such a tragedy, but somehow accept it and try to continue your life. So it's a combination of those two things.
Yeah, thank you. Any message, invitation, or question that you would like to share with the listeners?
It is linked to what we just discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And I already said 20 years ago, I might not have mentioned this.
Mm-hmm.
But in the work that I've been doing over the past years, and also now in The Hague, the many people I have met since I'm back in the Netherlands, it is so interesting to try and listen to what other people have to say, and to internalize what others say, what are priorities to them. It's interesting, it's nice, and I think it deepens the relationships we have with other people. And also at a professional level, in dealing with people from different cultures, different countries. Of course, we are all the person who we are. We all grew up somewhere, but do not immediately judge about the way people in other countries think and how they organize things or handle things. It enriches a lot if we try to be a bit more open, if needed, for the way other people grow up, think, live. It makes life a lot more interesting than only repeating your own well-known thoughts.
Yeah, Jan, any question that I should have asked you, but didn't?
Maybe whether my tennis skills have improved since I last beat you in Bangladesh.
I will never make any further comment, listeners. But Jan is a very good player, and we used to play actually together as a double as well. So we had a lot of fun. So, but yeah, if I think back about that time in Bangladesh, I'm really grateful for having met you there, because also in your and being the first secretary of the Netherlands embassy there, you also were really supportive in the work that I try to do there on HIV/AIDS prevention. So I think really, although in the scheme of things, the funding that was available for the projects that we did together was relatively small, but I think we did some. Everybody that was involved, it enabled a lot of beautiful things in terms of listening, creating voices, and agency. So I'm really thankful for your support there at that time. And
Thank you, Maurice. If I may interrupt you,
yeah.
What I consider very interesting is that mainly due to the activities of NGOs in Bangladesh, the country, which is really so overpopulated, has managed to reduce the fertility rates tremendously over the past 25 years. So that's an example where development cooperation has really had a huge impact. So it's interesting. I would not have expected then that the country would be able, in such a relatively short period of time, to reduce the fertility rate so much in a country that in those years already was overpopulated.
Yeah. No, and I think, Bangladesh is a country where they really invested, although that, in a way it's a strange word to use, but in women and children, and, creating more opportunities for further education, learning, raising voice, and that's pretty amazing. I mean, one of the first countries where you saw female healthcare workers driving around on a small motorcycle, on a moped, and those were all very good developments. I think that contributed tremendously to all, and it's a country that is has a lot of challenges in terms of relatively little natural resources, for example. So it's tough to compete, right, in the world economy. So manpower is there, And yeah, no, so thank you so much for that and raising it. Yeah, Jan, I've taken up a lot of your time already, so I am really thankful. Yeah, I would like to wish you good luck with, the assignment that you just started a couple of months ago. Exciting, as well. New, right? In for you. So yeah, all the best, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today and your knowledge. And yeah, great.
Thank you for having invited me, and of course, greetings to the listeners, and wish you a lot of success with this beautiful podcast.
Okay, great.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.